Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of the 2030 podcast, where I, Matt Lundy, your host, will be talking about a variety of things, climate change chiefly among them, and more specifically, the landscape of climate action that needs to be taken before the year 2030. We are very fortunate to have two guests for this first episode, John Fioretta and Amy Yee, who are both co-leads for Citizens Climate Lobby's South Silicon Valley chapter, of which I am also a member. John, Amy, thanks for joining me. Let's hop right into some of the questions I have for both of you. So could you both please give an overview of your expertise and experience?
If it's okay, I'll start, Amy. My name is John Fioretta. I'm not a climate change expert. I am an experienced volunteer. I founded the Silicon Valley South chapter more than 10 years ago. But Amy and I are co-leads right now, and I've served in several other positions, both in the chapter and within CCL.
I have been a volunteer for CCL, Silicon Valley South chapter, for 3 years, and I've been co-lead of this chapter with John for about the past year, although I took 6 or 8 months off during the last part of 2020 to work on some political campaigns. I've also been a volunteer with a number of other programs, the Program for Homeless Women, and I've done wildlife rehabilitation, and I and parrot rescue.
And both Amy and I are retired attorneys.
All right, thank you for the introductions and again for being on the show. It's a pleasure to have you, and I'm sure we'll have an interesting episode. So we're recording this the day before Earth Day. It'll probably go live on Earth Day, which is also the start of the US's climate summit, with various world leaders coming to virtually talk about climate with President Biden. In light of that, how do you think things are looking for the big climate picture basically around the US? And off of that, how is the US different on climate now versus kind of either the past administration or the past Congress or in the past in general? So any sort of thoughts on that?
Amy, do you want to take how things are looking now, and I'll give the perspective over time?
Sure. Okay. I think things are definitely improving, Matt. We lost 4 very valuable years, the last 4 years, which we really should have been taking strong action on climate change. And those are lost years. We can't go back to that. It's going to be difficult to make up for that. But at least now we do have an administration which at the very least believes the science and understands the urgency of taking action. So I'm looking forward to hearing what he thinks our NDCs should be and what other countries decide. But what's more important is not setting lofty goals, in my opinion, doing what's necessary to do now to reduce greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic that something will happen. John?
Yeah, to put this into perspective, when I started with CCL over 10 years ago, we had trouble getting some of the members of Congress to meet with us. We had people, including Democrats, just say what we were trying to do, that is get a price put on carbon and return the dividend to people, was just impossible. And I think through a combination of the science became clearer and the weather became more extreme, people's minds have changed, and the popular view is now that climate change is real, it's happening, it's serious, and we've got to do something about it. So there has been a real sea change over the last 10 years. I agree with everything Amy said, that it's really sad that we lost the last 4. But what's important now is true action, not setting goals off in the future, but doing something that is going to start getting the level of carbon in the atmosphere down now.
And you mentioned a carbon fee and dividend as what CCL is pushing for, and something that an example of something we can do now instead of setting a lofty goal. So I was wondering, could you expand on, I guess, the aim of CCL and following that, the carbon price?
Sure. Very simply put, what Citizens Climate Lobby is trying to do is we're trying to solve the impending climate catastrophe. And we're trying to do it by educating people and to give them the political will to make that happen. Our proposal is called Carbon Fee and Dividend, and it would place a fee on carbon and other greenhouse gases, take all the money, and except for a few percent that would be used for administrative costs, return it to the people, thus making sure that the poor and middle class were compensated for the resulting increase in prices. In addition, we put a tariff on carbon fuels and goods coming in from abroad that would be manufactured or mined without the fee in order to level the playing field for American goods. But we think there are two things that, if you just get down to the absolute bottom line nitty gritty, that we've got to do is, number one, as all the scientists and the economists are saying, we must put a price on carbon. And number two, we have to make sure that the poor and frontline communities who have borne the brunt of the harm of climate change don't get hurt. And that's why the dividend is so important. Amy, would you like to add?
I would simply add that one of the concerns I have, you were asking about how things are going, is that we will get a climate bill in this Congress, but that it will not be strong enough to be effective. And the climate bill needs to be robust enough to actually make the difference that we need to make. The carbon price needs to be high enough, and it needs to apply to enough greenhouse gases that we actually see a difference and it's actually effective. And I think it's going to take a lot of political will to get that done. And I think it's going to require a lot of overcoming the dysfunction that we currently see in Congress. And I think it can be done, but I think it's going to be a battle to do it.
All right. Well, a good battles can make for interesting, if not pleasant times. You mentioned that there are going to be things that we want to look out for, or that we want to make sure that if we do get a climate bill, or when we get a climate bill, we want it to be strong enough. So what are some of the things that we should be on the lookout for when it comes to making sure the climate bill is strong enough? Is it kind of chiefly that we get a strong carbon price? Are there other things that rival it? Any thoughts on the matter?
I think what the science is telling us is we have to be at net zero emissions by 2050. And the Citizens Climate Lobby proposal, which was introduced again by Representative Ted Deutch in the House of Representatives as HR 2307, it does that, or it gets us on the road to that. It would get us down to 90% less emissions now than, I forget the exact year, if it was 2005 or 2010, but it'll get us down most of the way. There would have to be some additional steps taken. But how it does that, it puts a price of $15 a ton of the equivalent of carbon released in a ton of emissions. And each year it goes up $10. So the fee is going to go up at a consistent, predictable pace to give business some time to get used to it. But it also means that it's going up at a pretty good clip. So I believe after 5 years, it would reduce about 30% of the emissions, and then after 20 would get it down to 90. And those are the kind of numbers that we have to start looking at now.
I very much agree. Speaking kind of off of that, and not to get into lofty goals, but to get to kind of what's going to happen before 2050. So one of the things that was anticipated possibly for today was an announcement of U.S.'s new NDC, the nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement, which is kind of just the emissions goals that we set for ourselves. And that's something that Amy briefly mentioned before in one of her answers. So we didn't, or we haven't at least as of 4 p.m. Pacific, gotten an announcement today about the new emissions goal for the U.S. We might get one tomorrow, and it's expected to be something like 50% emissions reductions by 2030. We've kind of already talked about some of the possible emissions reductions we're going to see in the upcoming years from something like the Carbon Fee and Dividend. So I guess I just wanted to ask for both of you what your take on that kind of goal was, specifically a 50% reduction by 2030. Does that sort of line up with what you have heard and think is necessary for the US to do? And it kind of already sounds like we answered this, but that the carbon fee is going to be one of the best ways to get there.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'll jump in here. The IPCC is an organization that is part of the United Nations, and they recommend that we achieve a 50% reduction by the year 2030, which is 9 years from now. And that 50% reduction is from 2005 levels, not from current levels, but 50% less than 2005 levels, if I understand it correctly. And so that is what is recommended by the IPCC. That's the International Panel on Climate Change. So I'm very much hoping that when the president makes his announcement about our goals, that would be incorporated into that.
And then, John, any follow-up thoughts or similar in agreement?
I agree. One thing that the current proposal, Representative Deutsch's bill does is by putting a price on carbon, you basically get about 80% of all emissions. It casts a much wider net than any individual sector like transportation or buildings. So even though a carbon price or a carbon fee and dividend plan would not get you to where you need to go completely, it gets you farther along than any other individual proposal. But we're all in favor of getting down to 50%, by 2030. I mean, we're down to significantly less than 10 years before we turn this around. And if we don't, then we're going to have significant permanent climate damage.
Which is something I hope everyone can agree that we want to avoid. This might be asking, asking you to show your hands too much or too much speculation, but just off your personal opinions, how likely would you say it is that in the, the infrastructure bill that Biden is currently planning or a future climate bill, say this year, how likely is it that we get some kind of carbon price enacted? Or maybe then if there's nothing specific there at sometime in the near future?
Well, members of CCL have been writing to their congressional representatives and to the president. We have a postcard campaign urging him to put carbon pricing into his proposals regarding climate change that he's going to announce tomorrow. So I think we're all kind of anxiously awaiting to see what kind of a carbon pricing bill he is going to endorse and is going to support. I don't know that we know for sure that carbon pricing will even be a part of it, but we certainly hope it will be. And we have certainly been trying to educate him on the fact that is probably the best way that we can achieve our goals, or at least it will, as John says, get us much further down the road to achieving our goals than anything else. So we're all really, really keeping our fingers crossed that, that will be in there when he makes his announcements tomorrow.
I think there's excellent chance of climate action this year. Because the president has made climate one of his priorities, because his party controls both houses of Congress, because of the extreme weather that we've been having for the last few years, for all those reasons, and also because we haven't had any action except negative action on this for the last 4. So for all those reasons, I think climate action is highly likely this year. But to get back to the point Amy made before, which I agree with, the question is, will it be strict enough? Will it be vigorous enough? And I'm hopeful, but there's a lot of sausage making yet to come.
I don't know if I would say unfortunately, but that seems to be the case with politics always. I guess somewhat off of that, would there be, or would either of you see us making significant, or the US or the world as a whole, making significant climate progress without a carbon price of some kind? Or does it sound like it's more kind of like categorically necessary feature?
I think I would describe a price on carbon as the necessary but inadequate measure needed to solve the climate crisis. You can't solve the climate crisis without it. There are lots of things you can do, but even when you add them all up without it, it makes it extremely difficult. And also, by putting a price on carbon, you're harnessing the power of the market. And you're giving all the businesses who deal with these kinds of things a huge incentive to exercise their entrepreneurship and to innovate and to come up with clean energy and other clean technology to address the issue. I mean, even without a carbon price, we've seen incredible advances in solar panels and wind turbines and Tesla vehicles. So, with that incentive, we could do much, much more. And I'm probably forgetting something, Amy, if you want to jump in.
No, I think you're right. I think how else are we going to get corporations to reduce the amount of carbon greenhouse gases they emit into the air? I think businesses are such that they need a financial incentive, and that this is going to be the financial incentive they need. And it's going to be predictable, which businesses want. They don't want something that's unpredictable that might vary from year to year. They need something that they can build into their future planning, which this is. And I think it's the only way to do it. It's the only way to accomplish a huge chunk of it, in other words.
All right. And this conversation might be a little bit biased because obviously, as I said at the start, I'm also a member of CCL, and part of the point that CCL pushes is a carbon price. So we are going to be the pro price category, but I think that's reasonable given that it has so many pros to it. So in a maybe less technical, more feeling, more general way. So this show and the stuff that I produce is, after the namesake, is the year 2030. So how are both of you feeling as we head towards 2030? It's still a ways out, but we have this next decade until there. It's going to be a very important seminal time. Are you feeling optimistic about it? Are you feeling uncertain about it? Any ideas or things people should keep in mind to do or to enact or to feel as we head towards 2030?
I'll jump in. I would say that I'm cautiously hopeful. I think it's probably the best way to describe it. I think that John may be a little more hopeful than I am, but I think it's possible. And I just hope that the country comes together. In a way, it's almost like I wasn't alive during World War II, but my parents were, and I certainly heard about it. It seems to me that that was a national crisis that faced the country, and pretty much the entire country came together to fight it. If they weren't, in the military, they were growing vegetables, they were, doing without this, doing without that, and so on. And I think that this is the same kind of crisis. This is the first time that I'm aware of that we've faced an entire planet-wide crisis. Okay, just the United States alone controlling greenhouse gas emissions is not going to solve the problem for the entire planet, and it's a planetary problem. It's not just a country-by-country problem. So, because the United States and China and India are the three largest producers of greenhouse gases, I think that people really look to America to take the lead on this. I hope they do, and I hope America can come through and do that and take the lead on it and come up with a solution that the other countries hopefully will then adopt as their own or similar type programs. John?
All right.
Yeah, Matt, I think you should call your show 2025 because the die will be cast before 2030. If we're going to turn this thing around, we have to do it before then. And we'll know before then if we have done that. There's already a certain amount of warming that's baked into the system that won't be corrected for decades. But if we have not got a system in place within the next few years that reduces the amount of emissions to the degree that we've discussed by 2050, then we are going to be experiencing significantly worse side effects. But Amy is right. I am more than cautiously optimistic. I think Winston Churchill once said that America will do the right thing after it's tried everything else. And I think that's where we're at now. We've tried everything else, and it's time to come together and do what's best. So I am cautiously optimistic. The thing that makes me less optimistic is we have a alternative fact universe that we have to deal with that they didn't have to deal with in World War II. And that is extremely troubling. But thus far, the public has managed to see through that, or at least most of the public. So yeah, I think we're going to do it, but we're not out of the woods yet.
Well, I'm happy to hear about the optimism, even if it's cautious. And while 2025 might be a more pragmatic or practical name, 2030 I just feels a little, I don't know, I don't want to say catchier, but a little bit more, maybe you're not talking about a year, I guess, is the one thing with 2030. 2025 is like, oh, that's a couple of years from now that's happening. But thank you for the answers. And yeah, I am happy. I am similarly somewhat optimistic, and I think that's a good feeling to have. Not to the point of complacency, but as evidenced by both of you being co-leads in a climate advocacy volunteer lobby, complacency isn't an issue here. So that probably covers most of the stuff I wanted to get into about specific climate policies and thoughts and opinions. We'll see, since this will release on Earth Day, we will see if the Biden administration comes out with any NDC or goal, see if it lines up with what we're saying. So we're kind of talking a little bit in the dark here. And we'll see how the first day of the virtual climate summit goes. So hopefully, we'll be optimistic for that. So coming to a little bit of a close, I guess because we're all in CCL and you guys are both CCL chapter co-leads, I guess if you wanted to, we've been talking about a good amount, but talk about kind of not your time in CCL, but if anyone's interested possibly in joining CCL, would you have any advice for climate advocacy in general? If people not sure what they want to do, but they want to get involved, doesn't have to be comprehensive, but any thoughts on the time in the organization, new members, being perspective, any kinds of stuff like that?
I think that what people need to do preliminarily is to educate themselves and get just at least a rudimentary understanding of the science. And my background is not science like yours is, but I have a very rudimentary understanding of it, and understand the consequences and understand what the problem is and what the likely consequences are going to be very soon. And then let your congressional representatives know that this is an important issue for you. And it's more important than tree planting or recycling. It's a huge, huge issue, and they really need to devote their time to it. Not that there aren't other extremely important issues in the United States, but this is really one, as I said, that affects the entire planet. So CCL, in my experience, has been a terrific group to join and to belong to. There are a lot of very, very bright, very competent, and just very nice people as part of the group, very helpful people. There are other organizations as well. If CCL isn't for you, there are other environmental organizations that are working towards similar goals. And I think it's important that we all get involved, and again, let your members of Congress know that you want them to pursue this and to enact a carbon fee and dividend bill. I'm sure you have some other suggestions.
Just check out the website, citizensclimate.org, and that will take you to the appropriate place if you wish to get further information or to join. And as Amy just said, there are lots of other organizations working on climate. So there ought to be a home for you somewhere. And as has been said, many hands make light work. And when there's so much to do, surely there's something for everyone to do. So we can use you. You may think that one letter or one email doesn't make a difference, but when combined with everyone else who's doing that, it does make a difference. And it is important, and it's needed right now.
Right. And let me just add also, we do reach across the aisle. We have a number of members of our group and of other CCL chapters who are more on the right of politics than us, who are more on the left side. We work together very well. There are conservative teams for more conservative members who want to participate in that. And CCL really does make a very strong effort, I think, and very good effort to reach out to people of all political persuasions, because this is an issue that affects everybody, no matter what your politics are on other issues. And we want to work with everybody who's interested in solving this problem.
Sounds good. And just one clarifying point, John, you said the website was citizensclimate.com. And as a somewhat new member, I would highly recommend it. I've had a good and very accessible time joining and getting right to work in terms of being involved locally with climate advocacy and pushing for a carbon fee and dividend and more climate action in general.
Well, we appreciate We're glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And we appreciate the opportunity to be on your blog.
Yes. Indeed.
Yeah. So that will do it for the questions I had. Is there any closing or parting thoughts from either of you? I know we kind of just did that with the CCL, but if there's anything else, feel free to say it now. No? All right. That's totally fine. Okay. So that'll do it for the first episode of the 2030 podcast. I want to again thank John and Amy for your time and for showing up and giving your takes, information, and climate volunteer expertise to the program. I'm sure made for a great first episode. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. So thank you. And thank you to everyone watching. Be sure to follow me for more content like this, since I want to have more conversations on climate advocacy, and everything about that heading towards 2030. I'm on YouTube at Matt, spelled M-A-D-T. And yeah, again, thank you for watching. and or listening if this is ever released as a solely audio feature. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.